Hey, what's up everybody? It's Lids, and we're back for some more Mardek, and we of course last time successfully completed Donovan's arena run. I would argue that was perhaps one of the most difficult ones thus far. There were several enemies where we thought if we did not have our elemental damage potions, things could have proved very difficult, so we lucked out a little bit in that regard. And as for who we have up today, it is Vern. We are at the point now where we've done most of our arenas. We are down to the people who are in the party, dating all the way back to Chapter 2. So, before we get going, let's talk some strategy here. So Vern is level 38, which means he's a fairly high level relative to other people that we've had in the arena here. That should help us out. He's sitting on 1,100 HP. That is good. If we could get just a little bit more, then he's probably in a pretty safe place in that regard. MP, he's at about 140. I do think that although he is primarily a physical attacker, he is one that will use MP pretty aggressively, so we probably are going to want to try to find ways to boost that MP a little bit further. In terms of attributes, he starts off with 17 strength, which is fairly high, 14 vitality, about average, only 10 spirit, which is surprising because it turns out Spirit is actually one of the most important stats. For Vern, we talked about it a little bit before. He is the only physical attacker who has their damage based at least in part on their Spirit stat, so more so than arguably ever before, we have reason to try to scale our Spirit. And then 11 agility is a little bit on the slow side, so unless we boost that, we should expect that our enemies will fairly often go before Vern. Other than that, he is a light elemental character, so he will of course have 20% resistance to light and 20% weakness to dark. So now let's talk about some of the items that we can put on him. So Vern is our first sword user that we'll have an arena run with, of course Mardek being the other one, but he is not yet gone. So that means we have several options here. Let's start off with Righteous Justice, which is a weapon that only Vern can equip. It has 40 base attack, which is pretty high for swords here. So there's that's going for it. It also gives a bunch of abilities that we've mastered, so no worries there. 3% crit chance is about average there. Effective against undead and light elemental does mean that against certain types of enemies, Vern will be dealing a lot of damage. Plus 2 strength and plus 3 spirit are both quite helpful for boosting Vern's base damage as well. And 20 MP is not a huge amount, but it's something. So this is a decent option for sure. We might want to go this route, but let's entertain the alternatives here. Those being, starting off with the Forest Edge. So this would be the Earth Elemental Sword, and that gives 40 base attack, so it is the same in that regard as Righteous Justice. However, it also gives +1 vitality. So this one, in addition to the other elemental swords that we'll talk about in a second, the primary benefit of it is that it gives Vern access to another type of elemental damage. Vern, like some of the people that we've talked about previously, has very limited access to anything other than one specific type of damage, that being light. And for that reason, you could find that getting something like the Forest Edge, even though it doesn't have quite as much in the way of attribute boosts, might be better, at least in order to give Vern some of that versatility. Similar story with the Flame Tongue here, slightly worse attack with 39, same crit chance, Fire Elemental this time, and +1 strength. So that one is also something you could consider to give Vern access to other elemental damage. Then as we start to go down this list here, the base attack will continue to get a little bit lower, so it does get a little bit harder to justify here. 37 base attack on the Fish Slayer, same 3% crit chance, and +1 spirit. This one being, of course, effective against fire. So that's another thing, is we do somewhat need to try to anticipate what type of damage would be most helpful to be able to do. So, like we said, plenty of access to light damage. And we can even hit our Soul Strike or use one of Vern's several light elemental attacks that we'll talk about later on to make sure that Vern will always have access to light damage. It is more so having these swords could be one of the only ways to make him have access to water, fire, earth, or in the case of the Aeropolitan Scimitar, air elemental damage. This one has the lowest base attack of all the elemental swords, however it does have a higher crit chance at 10%, so you could perhaps make the case that even if it does have the lowest base attack, it's still something you could consider putting on, +1 agility as well. Then we have the wild card, the one that we almost certainly will not want to use, but I at least want to acknowledge the fact that it exists. This being the Cursed Blade, which is the sword that we picked up recently in the Miasmal Citadel, and it is absolutely cursed. It has 45 base attack, so it is the highest base attack sword that we have access to at the moment. So that's the strength. It does also have 10% crit chance, which is tied for the Aeropolitan Scimitar for best as well. Dark Elemental damage would be a type of damage that Vern would not otherwise have access to, so it has that going for it as well. It drains HP, so it means another way of healing Vern. It inflicts Curse 100% on our opponents, so that means that our opponents won't be able to use their abilities. Plus 5 Strength would boost base attack for Vern. However, minus 5 Vitality for us means lowering Vern's life quite a bit. Minus 5 Spirit also lowers both Vern's attack and also the amount of MP that Vern will have. Then Auto Curse means that is applying to ourselves, so Vern will not be able to use any of his abilities. And Auto Bleed means that Vern will be taking somewhat significant damage every time he takes a turn. So this is, yeah, don't do this. Don't do this. There are some things that are perhaps tempting about it, but it's not worth it. Trust me, don't do it. So, for this one, I think we will go with Righteous Justice. However, there is an asterisk here, and we're going to talk about this later on, but we'll go with this. We just need to bear in mind that, remember, we will only have access to light elemental attacks if we do go this route. Then in terms of chest plates, Vern has many options because he can wear heavy, medium, or light armor, as well as general clothing. So that means Righteous Honor is the one that is only usable by Vern. It has 8 defense, which is pretty high, but no magic defense at all, which is a little bit concerning. Plus 3 Spirit would be perhaps one of the best ways to boost Vern's Spirit from the chest plate spot, with the exception of one other thing we'll talk about later on. 100 HP is also a bit. Empowers Light doesn't do anything at all, but absorbing 100% light damage, that does mean that that's a lot of resistances for Vern. So this is a decent option here, maybe not the most well-rounded because it doesn't have any magic defense, and we might prefer to have other types of elemental resistances rather than light. So I think it's still one of the front runners, maybe not the best armor, but let's carry on here. We have the Slovakian Plate Mail, which has 1 better in terms of physical defense, gives plus 2 Spirit, so slightly worse than the Righteous Armor in that regard, and also empowers light, but that also doesn't do anything. Gives slightly less light resistance because it's only 50%, but it also gives 50% resistance to air and 100% resistance to curse. So this one is, although not quite as specialized, does give us a nice combination of a few different things. Might be preferable if we want to balance things out more. So that's another one that could be certainly worthwhile for us to use. With the Mithril Plate Mail, which has the highest base defense of any chest plate that Vern can use, as well as 5 magic defense, making it better than either the Slovakian Plate Mail or the Righteous Honor in that regard. Does have plus 2 strength, unlike either of these two, and does have plus 2 spirit, putting it in line with the Slovakian Plate Mail, but slightly worse than Righteous Honor. It also gives plus 80 MP, so that's a pretty sizable boost in that regard. 20% resistance to Ether and Light is a small amount, but it is difficult to get Ether resistance. Light, a little bit less so on Vern, since he, as we saw here, he does have access to a few other light resistance items, and he of course starts off with 20% light resistance as a light character. So this is maybe a little bit more along the lines of raw defensive values, a little less in the way of resistances, but also still strong candidate. And then we've seen Night Jacket has been amazing for people who have not had access to these heavier armors here. So we could go this route and prioritize dark resistance, fire, water, air, earth resistance. Remember that Vern starts off with 20% weakness to dark, so this would be the best way of covering for that. So this is certainly a strong option as well. Then as we start going on here, I think things start to become a little bit more of a stretch with the Geo Jacket. Having absorb 20% earth is nice, however, having that along with 0 physical or magic defenses with only a little bit of vitality and HP probably doesn't make up for all the other resistances you would also be getting on the Night Jacket. However, that does mean that the Lesser Rainbow Shirt does bridge that gap a bit, what with it having 6 defense, 3 magic defense, and a little bit less on the resistances, though it does also include light on that list, whereas the Night Jacket did not. Then if we go on to the stoles, the steel stole would be another high defense item with 50% resistance to physical damage as well. That one, I feel like for other people who don't have access to heavy armors, this is a stronger candidate, but for Vern, we could always go for something like the Mithril Plate Mail, which has higher base defense and may not have that 50% resistance to physical damage, but has other things on it as well that mean that I would probably prefer this over the steel stole. Then the green stole would of course be the best way to boost Vern's HP by giving him 6 vitality in the chestplate spot. That one, I think we mostly just need a little bit more life. I'm not sure 6 vitality is necessary at this stage. That might be a little bit overkill. Then the Azure Stole is tempting, because, as we were saying previously, putting Spirit on Vern is quite powerful. That will boost not only his base attack damage, but also his green lightning damage, is one spell, assuming that you've mastered that, and also boost his MP a considerable amount, so that is pretty tempting in that regard. Then we have the Scarlet Stole for boosting strength by 6. This one I would say, yes, does also of course improve his physical attacks, however, because we also have that ability to do the same thing with Spirit, and Spirit has a little bit more of a broader application, what with it also boosting his spells and MP, I do think that the Scarlet Stole is in many ways just a worse version of the Azure Stole when it comes to Vern using it. So this one I think we can pretty safely rule out. But there are many strong options here, and I think for the most part it is just a matter of personal preference as to which chestplate you want to use. And I think some of it is going to also come down to what passive abilities and what shields do we end up using, because Vern has pretty good access to those as well. So let's actually go with the Salakian Plate Mail here, because I think that when it comes to putting on those passive abilities for resistances, air is one of the few that we do not have many ways to boost. So let's try going that route then. And then, in terms of shields, Vern is also the first character that we've had do their arena run thus far who has access to shields, Mardek, of course, being the other. So we can go with the Shield of Darkness, which would be a way to get some decent physical and magical defenses. +1 Spirit is also nice. Resistance to Dark is covering for Vern's weakness that he starts off with, 20% weakness to Dark. So that would be nice in that regard. We could also go with the Shield of Light, which is almost the same, the only difference there being that instead of giving Dark resistance, it gives Light resistance. So this would be emphasizing Vern's strengths, whereas this would be covering for Vern's weaknesses. And we did pick up some light resistance on the Salakian Plate Mail, so I think that the Shield of Light, for that reason, is probably not necessary in combination with this. That's probably more light resistance than we'll realistically need. Could go with the Rune Shield Plus, which does not give any resistances, but does give the most possible magic defense out of the shield spot with 10. So if you say were to have gone with something that was more physical defensively oriented on the chestplate spot, kind of like the Salakian Plate Mail, or Righteous Honor, or Mithril Plate Mail, Steel Stole, then the Rune Shield Plus does start to make more sense, but I do generally prefer resistances over physical and magic defenses. So for that reason, I think I'm probably going to pass on this. And in terms of resistances, the Glyph Shield is arguably the best on this front. Giving 1 defense and 6 magic defense is still quite strong, at least in terms of magic defense. And 16% resistance to fire, water, air, and earth is a bit of an odd number there, but that does mean that in total, this is providing more resistances than we would be getting on either the Shield of Light or the Shield of Darkness. It doesn't include Dark or Light on that list of resistances there, so that does mean that we wouldn't be covering for Vern's weaknesses, and for that reason you could perhaps opt to pass on this one here, but this is tempting as well from a resistance standpoint for sure. Then one thing that you actually have not yet seen us use is the Wing Shield, 4 defense plus 1 agility, and resist air 50% and resist earth 25%. This would be one of the best ways to get air resistance on Vern, because like I said before, getting air resistance is usually a tough thing to do. It does also give the minus 50% air, physical, and magic defensive reaction. The physical reaction, this is the only place you can get that. The air reaction, you can get that from Air Pendant, so that's not as rare, but these drop from the bandits in the Earth Temple, which I only managed to get one of these drop when we were doing some grinding in between arena runs, so this is a big pickup for that reason. And you could argue that perhaps we could go this route and then pass on the Salakian Plate Mail, because one of the reasons why we wanted to go with the Salakian Plate Mail was that it was one of the few ways to boost Vern's air resistance. So maybe for that reason, we could swap things around a bit and go with the Mithril Plate Mail instead, because this gives us more in the way of pure defenses. That might be a slightly better way of balancing things out there. Then let's talk about helmets next. So the Skull Helm is good defensively with 4 defense and 2 magic defense, and +2 vitality would also help in that regard, boosting Vern's HP. Could go with the Elf Cap, which is similar in terms of defenses, just a little bit more well-rounded between physical and magical defenses. Also gives a little bit more in the way of resistances with 20% to earth resistance. So that one is well-rounded. I do like it for that reason. Then we have the Black Hat, which has lower defenses, but does give 50% dark resistance. And in the past, we've said that maybe if we're using the Night Jacket, that's not totally necessary, because we already are absorbing dark damage there. Obviously, we're not using the Night Jacket right now. And also, because Vern starts out with minus 20% dark resistance, that does mean that we have a little bit more ground to cover in that regard. So the Black Hat is arguably better on Vern than it is with almost anyone else. However, we have also mastered Resist Dark, and also the Magic Dark reaction here. So that means that as long as we hit our reactions and activate this passive skill, then maybe that's still enough. We'll have to do some number crunching once we look at those skills to see just how much we'll end up having. But this could be a decent option for that reason there. Then we could go with the Feather Crest. The reason for doing that would be that it gives +1 Spirit, and as we were saying before, Spirit is useful for Vern from an offensive standpoint. So does that make up for the fact that it's a little bit weaker defensively and doesn't give us any of those useful resistances? I would say it's probably not good enough to use this one here. So I'm going to say let's go with the Black Hat, and then we may decide to swap this one around once we do see just how much dark resistance we can eke out from applying the passive ability and assuming that we hit our reactions. Then in terms of our accessories here, we could of course go with the Yellow Fairy to get the auto haste that has been huge for previous People's Arena runs. Also the Scarab of Health for the high defenses and +5 vitality, auto regen. That's all amazing. And then a little bit of resistances to various statuses. It's not a huge deal, but it's a nice little bonus, so it's something. If we were concerned about picking up more resistances or a little bit more HP, then the Emerald Bangle could be the way to go here. That gives us 50% Earth Resistance and 3 Vitality, 30 HP. That's solid, especially if you were to, say, go with one of these and 1 Scarab of Health. That would be the best way to maximize HP. But I think that, again, because we have pretty good access to resistances, what with Vern's ability to equip both shields and chest plates, and because he's mastered all of the resistances from the Night Jacket and Geo Jacket, not sure that's necessary here. And then the Sapphire Bangle, if you were to go the Spirit boosting route and wanted to maximize Vern's damage, then this could be a decent option for that reason. But for the same reasons we might want to rule out the Emerald Bangle, I think the Sapphire Bangle maybe not the best fit for us right now. And the Eclipse Amulet, this one is also very tempting because it also has very high defenses. It also has a bit of a Spirit boost, and then that light and dark resistance. Vern does start out with light resistance, yes, but we passed up on some chest plates that would have been better sources of further boosting that light resistance, so we might still want to get a little bit more if and when we can. And then resistance to dark, as we were saying before, we were trying to find ways to pick up a little bit more of that, and this certainly, giving 50% dark resistance, would be a good way to make that happen. I think let's try going with the Yellow Fairy and the Scarab of Health, and once again, we'll see where we end up with resistances, and if we do feel concerned about where we are, then we can swap these around a little bit and say put on something like the Eclipse Amulet to put on more dark resistance. Then one other thing, before we look over to Vern's skills here, I do want to make a brief mention to the Yalortian Amulet, because like I was saying, this is the item that gives us Green Lightning. It is imperative that you master this ability here. We picked up this item a long time ago, and at the time, I was a little critical of this ability, because for the most part, the damage is quite low, and Vern is at least more of a natural physical attacker than he is spell user. However, we will find that it is crucial that we have this ability here in Vern's Arena run, so if you have not mastered this ability, now is the time to do it. Other than that, we have also thrown on offensive damage potions, life restoring potions, MP restoring potions, stats removing potions, all of that stuff. That is also very important. So let's transition over to skills now. And in terms of active skills, as we see here, we have Smite Evil, which is one of Vern's base light damage abilities here. It deals extra damage to dark elemental creatures, and it just generally has more damage than his default attack, so it is a strong option that we oftentimes may not find that we need to use, because I think that Vern's base attacks are also quite powerful, so this could be overkill in many instances, and we could just save the MP by not going this route. And to tell you the truth, there's a lot of overlap between Smite Evil and Disrupt Undead. Disrupt Undead deals the extra damage to undead enemies. Most of the time, undead enemies are Dark Elemental, so that means that Smite Evil and Disrupt Undead would be functionally the same against them. There are a few undead enemies that are not Dark Elemental, in which case Disrupt Undead would be the way to go against them. But again, generally speaking, undead enemies either way are going to be weak to light damage, and so default attacks are probably still fine and would be a way to save some MP. Then Divine Glory is Vern's highest damage ability here. Also, light damage, of course, and the damage is based on Vern's level and spirit. Those are two things that we want to try to boost, as we've been saying. Lay on Hands, this is Vern's healing ability, and it also can remove curses and zombification. Of course, he's not going to be able to remove curses from himself with this ability, because curse prevents you from using any abilities at all. So, for that reason, I think it's unlikely we would end up using this ability here. More likely that we would just end up using potions to remove those statuses or heal. Green Lightning. So if you have mastered this, this is the only ability that Vern has that is not Light Elemental, and that is why it is so big here. Because if we do find that we're going up against any enemies that are totally resistant to or even heal to light damage, then Green Lightning will be our only way out of that situation, or using some of those offensive potions we were talking about earlier. Then let's transition to physical offensive reactions here, and I've said it before, Vern's offensive reactions, I would say, are the best in the game. So Smite Plus and Smite X, those are the huge ones because they deal extra damage based on Vern's spirit and level. So leveling up Vern further, he is one of the people who benefits most from those high levels because of Smite Plus and Smite X. They also get boosted from his spirit, so again, this is one of the main reasons why we want to try to scale spirit on Vern, for not only his physical attacks, but also his spells. Then we have the straightforward plus 10%, 20%, and 30% damage. We'll probably seek to put those on there because it's going to apply across the board. Then we have a little bit of RP remaining, and it's a little bit hard to tell what the best course of action with those would be, because sure, we can spend 1 RP on Soul Strike, but since we are already using a light elemental weapon, that's not going to be doing all that much for us. Are there other things that we would rather use instead of that? Quarry Undead for 3 RP would deal extra damage against undead foes, and for the most part, those enemies are already weak to light elemental damage, so we might not need any more damage against them. That is basically Vern's specialty, is he's amazing at taking out undead opponents, so that's not great. What we would really like would be to, say, have 1 more RP to throw on something a little bit different, like Drain HP to give us some life restoration, or maybe even Quarry Spirit, additional accuracy, or with 1 more RP, then we could even do plus 20% crit damage. Of course, we don't have that RP right now, so I think we have no option really but to go with Quarry Undead here. Like I said, Soul Strike in this instance is really doing nothing at all for us. Then Vern, with access to heavy armors and also shields, does have access to some of the best physical defensive reactions as well. Probably similar to what Eloise has, maybe slightly worse than that. But we'll go with the generic minus 10, 20, 30% damages here, because those will apply regardless of what type of damage Vern has taken. And then in terms of the soaks, those we might want to fill in if we have any extra RP. However, we do also have the ability to throw on an element-specific type of resistance here, so we could go with either air, light, or dark. So we did throw on the shield that we got from the bandits with the specific objective of boosting Vern's air resistance, because we don't have the passive ability for air resistance. However, because we do have a physical defensive reaction, that does mean that as long as we're hitting on reaction, it is functionally almost the same. So we probably do want to put this on, and I think that once we combine this with the shield, that does mean that we'll be at or near 100% air resistance, so that sounds great to me. However, that does mean that we are perhaps passing on the chance to completely mitigate dark damage, which would normally be one of Vern's weaknesses here. Getting 50% resistance to that is also quite tempting, and light as well. I think all these things are resistances that we are close to reaching 100% for, so it is largely a matter of personal preference. Then we'll stick with the 20% evasion because that applies regardless of what type of damage we're taking. However, we could consider taking this off and throwing on one of these. It is, of course, only going to apply in certain circumstances that will be taking dark damage, so evasion would apply across the board. This is more versatile. This is more specialized, but when it is applied, it is better. And normally I would say don't do this. However, because Vern has a lot of access to resistances, I think this might be an okay option for us to take here. Then we have 1 RP remaining. Let's go with 1 Soak. Let's go with the 10 damage Soak. Then offensive reactions for magic. We'll take what we can get. In terms of defenses, let's think about going with the, yes, more generic types of damage reduction here for -10 and 20% damage. And the spell resist 30 also applies regardless of what type of damage it is. But here is another opportunity for us to think about what type of damage do we want to be mitigating the most. Is it dark? Are we most concerned about that because Vern starts out with dark weakness? That could be the case. If we were to take away this damage soak here, then we could throw on 1 more, and maybe we do go with air in that regard, and that does mean that I think at that point we will be able to be at 100% air resistance regardless of whether it's an attack or a spell, as long as we hit our reaction. Then if we go to the passive abilities here, let's start with the resistances. And so I think that because we are not using the Night Jacket, Resist Dark is far more important with Vern than it was with any of our previous people. And then we deliberately passed on some resistances for Earth because we were thinking maybe we would equip this as well. Could also go with water or fire. We have plenty of options here. Ether, Rainbow Aura to get a little bit of everything. I think we do go with Rainbow Aura here to cover as many elements as we can. Does mean that we probably won't have 100% resistance to Earth, Water, or Fire. If you were concerned about those, then you could go that route instead. It is, like I said, largely a matter of personal preference and trying to predict which type of damage do we think we're going to take. Then with our 4 RP remaining, this is an interesting question here. We could perhaps make a point of boosting Vern's Spirit in the name of getting more base damage. It's not a bad idea. Also boost our MP a little bit, make it so that we aren't as reliant on restoring MP with potions. Could also throw on some kind of status immunity. In terms of insomnia, that might be a good one because it prevents us from getting put to sleep, and that means we wouldn't be able to take our turn. That's a bit concerning, and paralysis also means that we could potentially skip our turn, so that's another one that might be worth putting on, the locomotion here. But I think let's try going with the Spirit. It's a bit of a risk here. It's an aggressive move. It's going for the offense instead of the safer route with one of the status immunities here. I would say that I would probably recommend going with either Locomotion or Insomnia, or maybe even Purity to prevent curses. But I'm going to go a little bit more aggressive here with Vern, because I do want to see just how much damage we can deal out when we have a little bit of extra Spirit on. Okay, now let's take a look at where that leaves us in terms of resistances. Because we are, at 100% Dark Resistance, so that's huge. We were using the Black Hat, and that is largely the reason why. So that's big. Then we will actually be healing to air damage if we hit our reactions, because remember we have both a physical and magical 50% air resistance to that. With light damage, we're pretty solid there with 60% resistance to that. Earth, 45, and then fire, water, 20%. That's not much. Ether, 40 resistance to that. I'm not sure how much of that type of damage we're going to be taking. Big 20% resistance to that. Also pretty uncommon. So we did do a little bit of a combination of boosting as many resistances as possible, with the Rainbow Aura, and targeting specific resistances like air and dark. So let's see how this one works out. There are many more combinations that you can have with Vern than what you can have with many other people, as we were seeing, because he has access to many more abilities and has the shield spot available to him, whereas many others do not. So let's give this a shot here. Let's save up and perhaps even dump a few of his items here, because he has so many in his inventory right now. There's too many options for him. So we'll just get rid of a few of them so that we can pick up any items that he gets while he's in the arena. Don't have to worry about, do we actually have to drop things? That would not really be a position in which we want to put ourselves, so okay, there we go. Let's save. And then we will head in. So we'll do the survival tournament for Vern. And round 1, here we go. So we have already some undead enemies, and they are dark elemental, which is fitting because that means that they are weak to light damage. So this should be fairly straightforward here. We should presumably be able to take them out with just a default attack. We have haste, so we can take one out on our first turn and then take the other one out on our second turn. So that was comfortable. That is, like we were saying before, Vern's specialty, taking out dark elemental enemies and undead enemies. Round 2, coming up next. Antares. Okay, so this is tricky, because it is light elemental and it has 50% resistant to light damage here. So we could still try to take it out with just our default attacks. We would, of course, be dealing half our usual damage. So you could consider going with some kind of offensive potion here. That wouldn't be a bad idea, per se. I am curious to see how much damage this does. Let's gauge from this one here, and that was almost enough damage with just one hit. So, yeah, I think we're fine. Go with another one here. Save the MP, save the items. But if we find other light elemental enemies that are more resistant to that, then we're going to have some issues. Light Essence, we also don't have too many of those, so that's not a bad thing to pick up as well. And of course, these are enemies that are based on Vern's specific character strengths and weaknesses, so we do see that there are some enemies that are dark, undead foes, so that's really nice, but we're also running into several light elemental enemies as well. This one has 70% light resistance here, so this is another potentially tricky one. I do think that because it has more resistances than the previous enemy, it might be a little bit tougher to take it out with just a default attack, but it has less HP. So with 2 turns, we might still be able to get it done. Yeah, in fact, just 1 is enough. Vern's base damage can be the highest in the game, depending on if you boost his spirit enough. And then round 4, who do we have next? Skelezards. They are quicker than Vern, and they have also blinded us. They are, at least in that first case, dealing dark damage, which we actually healed to. Then the other damage and the physical damage, we did take some of that, and we are both blinded now and also cursed. So we definitely do want to take a turn to remove some of those statuses. Let's use a remedy here, get rid of them. And then that means that, of course, we use one of our turns to do that, so we can only take 1 out here. That is another one of Vern's weaknesses, you could say, is that although he deals a lot of damage to one enemy, he has no way of damaging multiple people at a time. So let's try taking 1 out here, and that means that there will still be 2 that have a chance to attack us once more, and they do apply another curse. That is unfortunate, and of course, we were talking about perhaps put on Curse Immunity before we went into Vern's Arena, and here you see that, yes, it would have perhaps been useful. Would we have been better served doing that instead of putting on the +2 spirit? Probably. Probably. But like I said, I wanted to see if we can maximize our damage here a little bit more, because 5,000 damage is pretty nice. That time, fortunately, you did not manage to apply any statuses, so we can go straight into attacking you here. And we have not yet used any MP. We are back on full HP, so we can just take you out immediately. No need to use any items, except we did miss. Fortunately, we have haste, so attempt number 2. There we go. Okay, round 5, who do we have now? More of these fallen cultlings, so again, they're pretty straightforward to take out with just a default attack. The problem here is that there are 4 of them, meaning that we'll only be able to take out 2 of them before they go. So some of these guys will get the chance to hit us, which of course did not happen the first time we faced them. And they're using some green lightning. How dare you? That is our ability. Get out of here with that. We did, of course, heal off all the damage from it, so not, truthfully, much of a problem there. We can still take him out. And it does seem like there's certainly a lot of dark damage that we are taking. So, a big deal that we did put on all that dark resistance, and we've actually been healing from that. Now we have a Wretched Soul. Speaking of dark damage, this is the mini-boss that we fought back in the Crimson Peak, and it is very weak to light damage, so that is great. It does have 20 physical defense, however, with the way that damage scales from Vern's Smite Plus and Smite X abilities, the additional spirit that he picks up is usually enough that he can still break through the defenses of even enemies that have high physical defenses. So we could perhaps go with a physical attack here. We, of course, have not used any MP yet at all, so for that reason, we certainly could use a Smite Evil. It's not like we're about to run out of MP, but in some ways, I'm tempted to see if we can get as far as possible without using any of those abilities at all. And that is enough damage. Even with those defenses. 4,000. So we're already on some mini-bosses here. That was just round 6. As for round 7, these green fish we saw in someone's other arena run. We have not yet seen them in the wild, and they did cause us to go to sleep, which is unfortunate because that means that we actually missed our turn there. You did just wake us up though, so that is helpful. In terms of how we take these guys out, they have 50% evasion, which means that physical attacks may very well miss. You do have a lot of resistances to elemental damage, but not light. So that does mean that if we could land one of those attacks, that would be fantastic. We would have also perhaps liked to have put on the plus 50% accuracy offensive reaction, but we just didn't have enough RP to make it happen. So let's try getting a hit in here. Of course, as we see here, we are by no means guaranteed to hit, and we just outright missed on all of our attempts there, and we could find that we get put to sleep once more here. That is in fact the case. But we did wake up immediately, so that is very fortunate. Just want to, try to take out at least one of these guys. Now this time, can we get you? Yes, we can. Okay, so the damage wasn't too bad, so it wasn't a major concern because when we did get hit, it wasn't like we were at risk of going down. Get a golden conch as well, that is a big crafting material. Just took some patience. Now round 8. Okay, another mini-boss here. We've seen many of these molesters, but again, we boosted our dark resistances there. We see that we have 100% resistance, as well as, I believe we equipped the dark magic defensive reaction, which is why we're actually healing, not just taking 0 damage from those. So this is another enemy that I think should have very high weakness to light. Yeah, you do have 10 physical defense, but I do think that just a default attack can likely still take you out. That it can. So Vern, there you see, when it comes to taking out enemies that are his specialty, well, he is fantastic at it. Doesn't even need any special abilities. Round 9. Okay, this is a combination of several enemies from the Lost Monastery. We've seen the Fallen Cultlings, yes, but now the Chaos Souls, those are new this arena run. They have 50 physical defense. So we were talking earlier about how Vern can break through a lot of high defense enemies. Can he do that here? This is going to be quite the test. Let's give it a shot. It is still enough. Wow. So yeah, Vern says, I'm up for the challenge. No problem at all. These guys, the Cultlings, we've taken out plenty of them before, so this shouldn't be too much of a problem either. So Vern has the damage to get the job done. One more round here. Who will it be? And this enemy here is the Trap. Of all the enemies in all the arena runs, this is the single enemy that I remember after 10 years in between playing this game. Why is that? Because the Fallen Paladin heals to light damage. So depending on how you set Vern up, this enemy could be unbeatable. Why is that? Because if you are using Righteous Justice, then you only have access to light elemental attacks, because your default attack will be light elemental, and Vern only has access to light elemental physical abilities here, and that is why mastering Green Lightning is crucial, because this would be one of the only other ways for Vern to deal non-light damage. In terms of your Earth resistance, you do have 50% resistance to that, so even that would be tricky. You wouldn't be dealing much damage, because Green Lightning, it usually doesn't do much in the way of damage, and this guy is taking less damage with his 50% Earth resistance, so the real answer, the preferred answer, is to use Alchemist Fires, because this guy is weakest to fire damage here, and so we absolutely will benefit from loading up on these. So we use, basically, any and all of them that we can. And this guy does hit fairly hard. We did get a bit of light resistance here. We're on 60%. So that does mean that this guy won't deal as much damage to us as he might have done if, say, you were to have gone a slightly different route defensively. That is another way in which this enemy could be extremely difficult, because even if you did master Green Lightning, because this is going to deal so little damage, it's going to be a war of attrition. It's going to take a really long time to take him out, and he's probably going to deal more damage than you are going to deal. So you're going to have to spend lots of time taking some chances to heal up, restore your MP, because you're going to blow through a lot of MP using green lightning all the time. So for that reason, yes, Alchemist Fires, they are the answer, for sure. So just keep on throwing them on here. And there you see, okay, even if he does crit, at least with our resistances and our fairly high defenses, not a huge problem. Especially when we have a regen as well, that means we're back up to full HP. Except he also gains haste and berserk. So when he gets to low HP, he gets stronger, which is another reason why, if you are relying on green lightning, things get difficult. And why having the Alchemist Fire really helps. So we will go next, even though he has haste, and therefore this should do the trick. Fallen Paladin down, VEHRN'S Arena completed, and he levels up as well. How fitting. Get a rending eye for our troubles. And congratulations, fighter, you have won the tournament, apparently. Here, have a prize. Also, get out of here. So yes, for that reason, I think that Slinic's Arena, of course, we did actually experience the trap. In that case, I didn't remember that one in advance. However, for VEHRN, the scars from struggling with that arena run 10 years ago still persist, and therefore I wanted to make sure that we were either able to use green lightning or, ideally, those Alchemist Fires. So for that reason, I would say that in terms of the difficulty of arena runs, VEHRN is at or near the top with Slinic. It's mostly just that I remembered to plan around this one, whereas I did not remember to plan around Slinic's. So, well done in that regard, VEHRN. You did successfully overcome that barrier. Let's take a closer look at what your reward was. It was the Yalort's Charm, which is 4 defense, 4 magic defense. It's a special item that VEHRN won from the arena. Only he can equip it. Gives the Emerald Shock ability, which looks like an active skill, an Earth Elemental active skill at that. And then, of course, it's only usable by VEHRN. It's Light Elemental and gives +3 Strength and Spirit, so it would further boost VEHRN'S capability of dealing tons of damage with his physical attacks. Resistance to Light and Dark, further emphasizing his strengths and covering for his weaknesses from a resistance standpoint, so that's great. And let's take this opportunity to catch up with our latest champion, VEHRN. What do you have to say about your arena run there? Have you changed your mind? Do you want to accept Yalort into your life? He loves you. You know, I've never really understood the Yalotrian teachings in detail. They seem more than a tad inconsistent. What was that? I dread to question you on it, lest you blather on self-righteously again, so I shall let my lesser mind speak up here. Your lesser mind, Rohov? You're referring to Mardek? Tell me about your past, maybe? Didn't I already do that? Not that it matters. I'm all for prattling on about yours truly, for I am truly remarkable and handsome and strong and brave and all-round admirable. Not to mention the most humble person I've ever known. You sure about that? Yalort has granted me these traits for my piety, of course. I am much stronger, braver, and wiser and handsomer than Sindor, rot his soul. That man was no man of Yalort. He was a narcissist, plain and simple. I hope Yalort smites him good and hard after he dies, which I hope is soon, if it's not already happened yet, which it may have done, as he's so weak and inept and foolish. Sindor? Don't dare speak that name around me. Who told you about him anyway? Whatever they said, it's wrong. He's scum. Oh yes, of course. All the ladies and townsfolk fawned over him all the time, and he was always successful in his missions and well regarded by all. But only I know what a fool, what a nasty piece of work that man is. He's a pretender, a charlatan. He has no skill, he's no paladin. Does it not say in the holy scriptures of Yalort that one who takes pride in himself and in the admiration of those around him that give it is a sinner, the worst of sinners? If it doesn't, it should. So what if everyone liked him more than me? It wasn't that way anyway. He lied. Everyone loved me. Laughter is a sign of admiration. And paladins are supposed to be celibate. The girls respected me in that regard, unlike that tramp of a man. Yes, tramp. That's right. Oh goodness, VEHRN, look at his face. That is very concerning. It's gonna be okay. I hope that Sindur dies a miserable and humiliating death at the hands of Yalort. That'll show him for daring to mess with me in our youth. Think he's better than me? Thinks he can get away with belittling me? We'll see about that. Though Yelot, I pray that you give me the honor of smiting the demon in saint's clothing personally, so then he knows his killer and suffers for eternity with my face in his mind, smiling, victorious. Yeah, Vern, this is a little concerning. Okay. Ah, Mardek, you're still here. Forgive me. I got carried away. The evil of that vile monster of a man certainly does rile me up something awful. Maybe one day we'll meet Sir Sindor in our travels. Then we can give him a taste of his own medicine and wreak justice in the name of the Omni-Dragon. Speaking of which, let's be off on those travels once more, my friend. The needy call out for our divine aid, or mine, at least, though feel free to follow me in my god-driven delivery of justice and mercy. Maybe some of my splendor will rub off on you, if you are lucky. Alright, well, thank you, Vern, for sharing more of those personal details. Yeah, like I said, maybe a little bit concerning that you seem to have lost your mind a little bit there, but hopefully you've settled down a little bit now. But congratulations one more time for completing your arena run and picking up your Yellort charm. As for who is up next on their arena run, well, there are only 2 more remaining next on our list. Tune in next time to find out.